Hello everyone, welcome to today's story. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you loved deeply? What if the person you trusted the most suddenly hides a painful truth from you? Imagine building a life together, only to have everything unravel in a single moment. Can love survive when trust is broken? Will forgiveness be enough to heal the wounds? Or is it too late to repair what's been shattered? Join us on this emotional journey of love, betrayal, and the tough choices that come with it. Will they find a way back to each other? Or is this the end of their story? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and help us reach 1,000 followers so you don't miss any of the drama unfolding. Stay tuned to find out what happens next. James stood quietly in the spacious living room, the golden evening light streaming through the large windows, casting soft reflections on the floor. The architectural plans for the house lay before him, but his thoughts wandered elsewhere. Would Diep like this house? He wondered, his gaze drifting outside, where the tall trees swayed in the cold breeze. He wanted to create a perfect home for her, a peaceful retreat amidst the noise of life. But the weight of the decision felt far too heavy. Beside him, his mother sat, watching him with a knowing gaze. Choose whatever design you think is best, but remember, you need to ask her opinion. You can't decide everything by yourself, she said gently, as if reminding him of the importance of shared decisions in a relationship. Despite his mother's calm reassurance, James couldn't shake off the nagging doubts in his mind. Will Diep accept everything I'm doing for her? He asked himself. His thoughts turned to the struggles Diep had endured, the wounds of her past that had never fully healed. He wondered if, despite all his efforts, she might not feel the same, or if she was already carrying unspoken doubts. While he longed to build a perfect life together, a deeper concern lingered. It wasn't just about the house, it was about their relationship, the balance between his love for her and the unhealed pain from their past. His every action now seemed to carry the weight of their future, and he couldn't quite figure out how to make it right. Diep sat quietly in the corner, her eyes fixed on the designs James had carefully selected. She remained silent, absorbing everything in front of her, but her mind was far from the beauty of the plans. There was a storm brewing within her, a storm of confusion and doubt. James had always been her pillar, the one constant in her life, but now something felt different. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was amiss. James noticed her distant gaze. He took a deep breath before speaking, his voice tentative, as though testing the waters. "Do you like it?" he asked, hoping for her approval. His eyes searched hers, looking for the warmth and affection he was accustomed to. But there was only silence for a moment. Diep finally met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of uncertainty and pain. She hesitated, then spoke softly. "James, there's something I need to ask you." Her voice trembled slightly. "Is there something more to your relationship with your secretary?" The question hit him like a cold wave. James stood still, the weight of the moment sinking in. "What do you mean?" he asked, though he already knew what she was implying. His heart raced as he tried to grasp the situation, realizing that the warmth they once shared was slipping away. Diep's eyes filled with unshed tears, her voice barely a whisper. "I saw something. I heard something. Is there a truth you've been hiding from me?" The words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken, as the room filled with an awkward silence. The tension between James and Diep was palpable, the air thick with unspoken emotions. James swallowed hard, his chest tightening at the sight of her hurt expression. He had hoped to avoid this confrontation, but it had come too soon. He could no longer hide from the truth, even if it was painful. "Diep," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "There's something I need to explain. It's not what you think." He took a slow step toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. "I never wanted you to feel like this. Betrayed." Diep's breath hitched. Her heart ached with every word he said, yet she couldn't bring herself to look away. The fear in her eyes was evident. "I don't understand, James. Why would I think that if there wasn't something to it?" Her voice was soft, but laced with the rawness of doubt. James let out a long, shaky breath before continuing. "It's true that I've been spending more time with her, and yes, we've been closer than I should have allowed. But I swear to you, Diep, it's not what you think. It's not about love." He paused, trying to find the right words, but they felt inadequate. "I've been trying to figure out how to deal with some personal issues that I didn't want to burden you with." Diep closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of his words sinking into her heart. She had trusted him completely, and yet here she was, unsure of where she stood. She felt her walls start to crumble. "But why didn't you tell me?" she whispered, the hurt in her voice breaking his heart. "Because I didn't want to lose you," James replied quietly, stepping closer to her, his hand trembling as he reached out. "I thought if I kept it from you, it would be easier. But I see now that I was wrong. I should have trusted you with everything." For a long moment, neither spoke. The room felt colder now, not because of the weather, but because of the distance between them, an invisible gap that had grown larger than they had realized. The silence between James and Diep stretched on, thick and unyielding. Diep stood motionless, her heart heavy with confusion and pain. She had always trusted James, believed in the sincerity of his love, but now the foundation of that trust seemed to be cracking. James watched her, his expression tormented. He could feel the distance growing between them, the very thing he had feared. But how could he explain? How could he make her understand the complexity of his emotions? He had kept things from her in the hope of protecting her, but in doing so, he had only hurt her more. "I never wanted to hurt you, Diep," he said softly, almost pleading. "I thought I was doing the right thing by keeping my struggles to myself. But now I see. I see that the truth always comes out, no matter how hard we try to hide it." He took a step closer, his voice growing quieter. "I'm sorry." Diep closed her eyes, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. She had always been strong, always tried to move forward, but now everything felt like it was unraveling. She thought of the dreams they had shared, the house, the life they were supposed to build together. Was it all just a fragile illusion? "James," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what to believe anymore. You told me so many times that we would face everything together, but this feels like a betrayal." Her words pierced him like a knife. He had never imagined that the woman he loved so deeply would look at him with such hurt in her eyes. The weight of his actions, the consequences of his decisions, were finally sinking in. He had let her down in ways he never thought possible. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," James continued, his voice shaking. "But I will do whatever it takes to make this right. I don't want to lose you, Diep. Please, don't let this be the end for us." Diep turned away, wiping away a stray tear. The pain of it all felt suffocating, but a small part of her still held on to the hope that they could somehow find their way back. Could love really heal a wound this deep? Or would the scars remain forever? The night stretched on in an oppressive silence, the kind that makes every second feel like a weight pressing down on the chest. Diep sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, trying to find the words that would make sense of everything. The room, once a place of warmth and shared dreams, now felt foreign to her, as if she were trapped in a space that no longer belonged to them. James stood by the window, his back to her, lost in his thoughts. He was waiting for her to speak, waiting for the words that might give them both a sense of clarity, but they weren't coming. The room seemed to close in on him as the guilt gnawed at him from within. Could he undo the damage he had caused? Could he win back her trust, her love, after all of this? Diep's voice broke the stillness, her words soft but steady. James, I don't know if I can do this anymore. Everything feels so broken now. She paused, her throat tightening as she fought back the tears. You said you were protecting me by keeping things from me, but in the end, you hurt me more. I don't know how to move past this, how to believe that what we had is still real. James's heart sank, every word she spoke a reminder of how much he had failed her. His body tensed, and for a moment, he thought he might collapse under the weight of it all. But he steadied himself, forcing his voice to remain calm. I'm sorry, Diep. I was wrong, and I know that. But I need you to understand, I did it because I love you. I just didn't know how to make things right. And now I'm asking you to give us another chance. Diep looked away, her eyes filled with unshed tears. She could hear the sincerity in his voice, but that didn't erase the pain that still lingered in her heart. I want to believe you, she whispered. I really do. But I need time, James. Time to figure out what I truly want, what's best for both of us. I can't just let go of everything and move forward like nothing happened. The weight of her words hit him harder than he had anticipated. Time. That was the one thing neither of them had, not with all the consequences they were facing. But if there was any chance of healing, if there was any hope for them, it had to start with patience. I understand, James said quietly, his voice filled with sorrow and understanding. I'll wait for you, Diep. I'll wait for as long as it takes. For the first time in hours, Diep lifted her gaze to meet his. She didn't know what the future held, or if they would ever find their way back to each other. But in that moment, she saw the man she had once loved, the man who was willing to wait for her to heal. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was enough to take one small step forward. Days passed in a quiet, heavy stillness. James respected Diep's need for space, giving her time to process everything. The house, once meant to be a symbol of their shared dreams, now felt empty, like a memory that hung in the air, beautiful, yet distant. Diep spent her time alone, lost in her thoughts. The love she once felt for James was still there, but so was the ache of betrayal. The weight of deciding whether she could forgive him or not was suffocating. Could they rebuild what was broken? Could she ever trust him again? James, on the other hand, continued to work on the house. He poured all his energy into it, hoping it would serve as a gesture of love, an apology, a fresh start. Yet the silence between them grew heavier, and he knew that time was running out. Then, one evening, Diep reached out. It wasn't a grand declaration, but a simple request to meet. James felt a mixture of fear and hope as he prepared to see her again, unsure of what to expect, but certain they needed to face it together. When they met, Diep's eyes met his with a mixture of uncertainty but also something else. Perhaps the first spark of trust returning. "James," she began, her voice soft yet steady. "I've thought a lot, and I've realized something." She paused, taking a deep breath, and then continued. "I don't know what the future holds, but I want to try again. Not for the past, but for the future we could build together." James didn't speak immediately. Instead, he nodded, feeling the fragile but powerful spark of hope beginning to grow. The days that followed were filled with a quiet, cautious optimism. James and Diep, though still carrying the weight of their past, found themselves stepping forward together, slowly but surely. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, just small moments of connection that hinted at the possibility of healing. Diep continued to spend time with the house project, allowing herself to become involved, yet still keeping some distance. She could feel the shift in her heart, the slow process of rebuilding the trust that had once been so easy to give. Every decision James made, every effort he put in, began to chip away at the walls she had built around herself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the land, James invited her to the construction site. The house was taking shape, its framework rising steadily under the evening sky. James stood beside her, his eyes filled with a quiet determination. "This is just the beginning," he said softly, his voice full of meaning. "A new chapter for us, for everything we've been through and everything we still have to face." Diep looked at him, her heart torn between the past and the future. She could still feel the sting of betrayal, but she also saw the sincerity in his eyes, the genuine effort he was making to rebuild what had been lost. "Maybe we can make this work," she whispered, more to herself than to him. But in that moment, she realized that forgiveness wasn't just about erasing the past. It was about accepting it, learning from it, and choosing to move forward together. As they stood there, side by side, watching the house take shape, a small spark of hope flickered in Diep's heart. It wasn't the end of their journey, but perhaps, just maybe, it was the beginning of something new.
Trên một CEO bị cuốn vào cơn bão cảm xúc khi Diệp phát hiện ra để che giấu một sự đau lòng, dành thời gian khiến Diệp tin rằng điều gì đó giữa họ khi niềm tin bị rạn nứt. Jim cố gắng giải thích hành động của mình, tiết lộ rằng làm vậy vì muốn bảo vệ Diệp khỏi những khó khăn về cá nhân, trong khi Diệp vật lộn với cảm giác phản bội và những quyết định cho Jim một cơ hội để chứng minh sự chân thành của anh. Khi Jim nỗ lực để lấy lại niềm tin của cô, cả hai phải đối mặt với những quyết định khó khăn và sự tha thứ. Quá khứ và tương lai của họ, liệu tình yêu của họ có vượt qua được hay không, hay đã quá muộn?